Welcome to episode 271 of Sports Geek. On this week's episode, I chat all things esports with Manny Anekal.
Welcome to Sports Geek, the podcast built for sports digital and sports business professionals. And now, here's your host who is helping advertisers understand esports broadcasts, Sean Callanan.
Thanks, DJ Joel. Yes, my name is Sean Callanan, and you can find me on most social media platforms. The best place to go is to go to the website, sportsgeekhq.com. That's where you can find all episodes of the podcast, both this podcast, interview podcast, and the Q&A episodes. And also, you can subscribe to our Sports Geek News email newsletter that comes out every Wednesday. So you read what I read, and you read what you click on when I share in the social media space. Otherwise, if you want to connect with me, you can send me an email, old-fashioned style, Sean@sportsgeekhq.com or at Sean Callanan or at SportsGeek on most of the social media platforms. And if you do, because we are talking esports, you can follow my esports team, my League of Legends team in the OPL at Gravitas. And that's how you say it. People sometimes ask, how do you say Gravitas? That's how you say it. And if you don't know the meaning of the word gravitas, please look it up. It means to have weight. Someone who walks into the room and has a mighty presence, who gives a stirring speech, that is said, someone has gravitas. And I hope my boys have gravitas and turn around our fortunes in the OPL season that's currently underway. Don't forget, as always, you can send in your questions, whether they might be questions about esports and around the conversation I have with Manny today. You can do that via social media, or you can just simply send it in. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/questions. I'd really appreciate if you've got a question, whether it's related to what you're doing, it can be completely specific, or it can be a big, broad question, take on all questions. So please send them in, or if you see me in real life, maybe at a Sports Biz Melbourne event, ask me a question there. I might repurpose that question if it's a real good one for the podcast. Before I get into my chat with Manny, just want to see if you've checked out our Patreon campaign. You can support all the sports business content that we produce at Sports Geek, help pay for people like James who edits the podcast, and DJ Joel that does a terrific job with your voiceovers and the ads. I'd really appreciate it. Help reduce the costs and cover the costs of the podcast and the newsletters. And it's a way for, if you are a sponsor, a sports technology, marketing, digital type business and want to reach my listeners are in USA and North America and Europe and Australia and New Zealand. It's all over. So really a way to reach the global sports, digital and marketing and technology audience. It's a real opportunity. You can do that via sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon. You can do it for as little as a personal supporter as $4 a month. If you're a startup that wants to get a bit of a spike in traffic and put your name in lights and get your logo on the show notes, they're available on every single show notes. You can do so, or if you're a bigger business, silver and gold support options are available. But let's get into it. Let's get in and talk a little bit of esports with Manny Anekal. That is his Twitter handle. That's the best way to reach out to him. We chat about his career in gaming and esports and some of the trends that he is seeing in the US and also globally. So here is my chat with Manny Anekal. Very happy to catch up here on the podcast. Someone I've been following for a long time on Twitter and has been a resource for me, learning a lot about the world of esports. Manny Anekal, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, John.
Well, first of all, I always ask people when they start an interview is how they got their start in sports. But for you, how did you get your start in gaming and esports?
Yeah, it's a great question. Roll back the clock about 15 years. That's how long I've been in the gaming and esports space. I primarily started my career in digital advertising and was working for Nielsen at the time and was reading an article about a company that was pioneering dynamic advertising inside video games. Yep. It was a startup called Massive Inc. Yep. And I was like, this is absolutely phenomenal. It makes complete sense. And I was also thinking, why didn't I think of this myself? So I went and joined Massive to run their publisher team. So I work with game developers and publishers, integrating our SDK and getting them on our platform. And after about a year or so, we got bought by Xbox. So I spent some time on the Xbox team, integrating our technology into Xbox Live. From Xbox, I then went to Electronic Arts, who was my number one client at the time, to go run and manage their whole advertising operations team. So that was running all their platforms across Pogo, online, in-game advertising, dynamic advertising, and soon to be launching social networking with the acquisition of Playfish. And from EA, I went to Zynga. I wanted to get some social networking experience and free-to-play gaming experience. So I was there for the rocket ship ride up and the rocket ship ride down. From there, I went to Keep, which is a mobile gaming company and dealing with advertising. And then finally, I wanted to come back to New York, and I took a job at Major League Gaming, which got my foot in the door in esports. And from there, I was the VP of marketing, handling all outbound and inbound marketing, RFP responses, etc. And this is 6 years ago. So a lot's changed since then, Sean.
Oh, I can imagine. But it's good to get a bit of that history, because there's a lot of people, and I guess even my listeners would be seeing esports has only come up on the radar in the last 4 or 5 years, and not knowing that there is that history in depth. What for you is some of the biggest issues facing esports right now?
Yeah, no, that's another good question. And to your point about timing, everyone looks at esports as sort of this, overnight success story, or this, lightning in a bottle that was created. But really, it's over, 10, 15, 20 years old if you really want to roll back the clock to StarCraft and some of those earlier titles. Yep. So it's been around for a while. It's just been in the press and mainstream media, and then a lot of investment that's come into the space over the last, let's call it 5 years or so. That's really sort of kind of blown it up really, really big. But, to your question, there's a lot of challenges still. One is infrastructure.
Okay.
They still need a huge role for infrastructure between leagues, teams, players. How do you recruit? How do you sign someone to long-term contract? What happens after their contract ends? Because the age of players are really between, call it 16 and 25.
Yeah.
What happens to a player afterwards? So, we got to figure that situation out.
So you think, so on that, just on the infrastructure piece, was an interesting one, I guess. Me coming from the sports world and seeing a lot of the sports world come into the space, they're coming in, and that infrastructure of players associations, training for players, development of players as a feeder system into the pro leagues. Like, there's a lot of that's the infrastructure you're talking about that is well established in the basketballs of the world and the footballs of the world. That's still developing in the esports world.
Exactly. It's pretty straight, cut and narrow on the traditional sports side is, graduate from high school, you pretty much, it's here in the States at least, you go to college, maybe potentially you skip college like in the ranks of the NBA, but you pretty much go to college, play a couple of years there and then go play professional sports. That's pretty much how it works. And in the esports, it's not there yet. So infrastructure on sort of the growth and how we're going to take care of our players going forward, I think is going to be a big problem that we're going to need to solve. And then furthermore, in terms of, what's really, the elephant in the room is probably esports monetization. Yep. And that's a big one is, and the not so dirty secret in esports is that, a lot of these teams that are seeing ridiculous valuations, something like 14x of revenue right now, they're not profitable. So that's a big, big problem right now. And, some of it's gotten to do with hype, and there's definitely some zealous enthusiasm that's come into the space. But hopefully we'll see, a little bit of a correction, in the near term where things get back down to more realistic terms.
And so when you say that, then what are the streams, or what are the avenues for, monetization? Because in traditional sports, the top three are media rights, sponsorship, and ticketing. And to a certain degree, esports doesn't really have, a big portion of both of those, because a lot of events are online or only viewed online. So the ticketing component's not there all the time. And as far as media rights, it's still developing. We're starting to see some of the streaming giants pay for some esports content and leagues, but it's nothing along the lines of, the numbers that the NBA and the NFL and Premier League are getting. Where are esports leagues and orgs finding some avenues for monetization?
Yeah, another good point. I think you kind of nailed it with really the media rights issue is
Yep.
that, you've seen some deals right now. So Overwatch League, Hearthstone, as well as Call of Duty League signed an exclusive agreement with YouTube Gaming. So
Yep.
that's the exclusive platform that they're going to be streamed on. So you saw a deal, I think it was about 135 million over 3 years, which is purportedly reported as what the deal terms were. Now you're talking about split that over 3 years, then divide that by X number of teams, and it's really not a whole lot. It's not like the NBA where you're getting a check for $100 million to start the season
Yep.
from your TV rights, right? So media rights haven't really come into play yet, but hopefully we'll see that going forward. So how are teams monetizing right now? It's really, I would say, three different ways. One is content. You look at FaZe Clan. I don't look at them as an esports team. I look at them as a content machine, right?
Yeah.
They put out great content. Furthermore, merchandising and apparel. So FaZe Clan does this great as well. One other team I point out to is 100 Thieves. I think they're going to be the supreme of esports with the way they're going with their drops and selling out their drops within 20 minutes of launching, which is pretty amazing.
I mean, the 100 Thieves are a good example because they have been known for that, to do those limited drops, and even it was just in the last couple of weeks where they put out, here's our latest design, and it copped all hell and feedback online for it's a terrible design, or you spent 5 seconds on it, but then then Nadeshot will show a drone shot of people lining up at their store in LA. It's still showing the demands there, and you can't read it. You can't believe everything from internet feedback. They've got a pent up demand for people wanting that merch, whatever they put out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the line, it was called the numbers line that was put out, and a lot of the merch was essentially just a 100 logo. They're representing 100 Thieves, which came on the T-shirts, as well as their beanies and their shorts and other things like that. And it wasn't really, let's call it that, stylistic creatively. But I think they know what they're doing. The team over there is very smart, and that's why you saw it sell out within 25 minutes. That's pretty remarkable. I think they're doing something along the lines of at least $250,000 for the sales. Don't quote me on that, but I've heard John Robinson talk about that, just what they're doing on a Saturday when they're doing these drops, and it seems to be the amount of money that they're making. So that's the way that 100 Thieves is monetizing as well on the apparel side. And then finally, to finish off your question about how teams are monetizing. So we talked about content, we talked about merchandising and apparel, and then finally sponsorships and brand opportunities. You've seen a ton of sponsors come into the space lately, and it's no longer, what is esports? It's basically how do we basically activate and get into the space. So you're seeing, 7-figure deals for jersey sponsorships, let's see, Jersey Mike's recently signed a multi-year deal with Team Liquid, which is sort of unheard of. You haven't seen multi-year deals in esports today. That's the third way that teams are monetizing. So if you look at those three revenue streams, I didn't mention prize pools and I didn't mention ticketing because it's really, really, unless you're part of a franchise league like OWL or CDL or even, or Riot, you're not going to get a chance to monetize on the ticket side, which is really just starting out. So Call of Duty League launched this year. Overwatch League is in season 3, so they're just starting this year to do their homestands and their home and away series. So we'll see how the sales have been going. I've been keeping my pulse on Call of Duty, and there's still a lot of tickets left over for these sites. For these home events. So luckily, the Chicago one has sold out for both general admission and VIP. So I think this will be a good test to see if local markets really work for esports.
But it also is a bit of what esports needs to learn, because selling out an event and the means to, selling out a live event, which is a common problem in sports. We always talking about, the cheeks and the seats, the marketing and getting people to come to event and changing their behavior when they're used to watching it, on Twitch or on YouTube and chatting with their friends to dive into the live experience, because there's a lot of esports fans that most likely haven't been to a live event because there hasn't been a lot of them, globally.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely very fair. And if you look at, there's a really sort of famous chart that's been going around for the last few years. It talks about esports monetization from a fan perspective.
Yeah.
It's something like 10% of what traditional sports gets.
Yeah.
So that's, including, ticketing and merchandising and getting access to these events and these fan activations, which is just starting. But on the esports side, it's just beginning to blossom and sort of take off. So I think you're going to still see, ticketing be, and I think these one-off pop-up stores that a lot of these teams are doing, I think that's a really interesting idea. But until media rights really come into play, and the only one who's probably really cleaning up on media rights is Riot.
Yep.
And I mean, their deal with Bilibili is something significant in China, and they have their deals across the world. But until you see media rights taking off, I think it's going to be challenging to sort of get into the black in the next couple of years.
So from a media rights point of view, what we've found sort of talking to agencies that, like you said, they're excited by the audience that esports is talking to and the people that they're talking to, the people that they're watching and engaged with, because it's a hard audience to reach. How has it been trying to explain to the traditional advertisers and brands that want to get into the space about streaming, like so they can compare it to other media that they're buying? How's that been? How has that evolved? You said you were early working with Nielsen. What work's been done there? Because we always hear of the hype numbers of how many people are watching, and that draws people in, and everyone's a hype man for esports when you're in esports. But how do we start to normalize that conversation to actually have valid numbers, because that's going to start bringing in the media money and bring in more interest into the space?
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point on Nielsen, I'd point out to what they did last year, which is moving towards a metric called AMA, which is average minute audience. And the AMA is most closely related to TV. Okay. So if you're buying TV already, and TV is still a multi-billion-dollar industry in the US, it's very easy for you to then look at, okay, I'm buying ESPN. Now, what am I getting for League of Legends? What am I getting for Call of Duty? What am I getting for Overwatch League? It's really easy to then translate over to say, okay, I spent whatever for a 30-second spot on ESPN. What does that money translate to if I went into an integration or a sponsorship on the esports side?
Yep.
So I think with the launch of AMA, that's been a huge boon to the industry, giving them a comparative metric for media buyers to say, okay, I'm buying TV. Here's what I'm buying with esports as well. And then the publishers that have signed on, you're talking about Riot, you're talking about Activision, you're talking about Blizzard, and you're going to see a lot about ESL. You're going to see a lot more of those come onto board pretty soon.
So the people who are listening that don't understand maybe the problem that we're discussing and the problem that potentially AMA average solves, like what? Because we have the same problem in digital where YouTube, Facebook all report views differently, right? And that's where the problem, I guess, started from by someone saying, and I think it was, I'm not picking on one case, but it has been, more people watch the Fortnite World Cup than the Super Bowl. When we hear those kind of statements, what are the numbers they're pulling from to say that? And then how does AMA debunk that number is probably the best way to put it.
Yeah, great question. So to your point is that, for the last several years, until AMA started coming out as this default metric, people were reporting views on Facebook and YouTube or Twitch, whatever it may be. People were reporting unique users. People were reporting peak viewers. So, a lot of that's great for vanity metrics. But really, AMA is the best one to really correlate for two reasons. One is, what's your actual audience size on a per minute basis? So it'll give you what your average the audience is versus, okay, peak, you might peak at 1 million, but if you're only averaging 500,000, you're not really getting that reach for the brands and the advertisers you're speaking with. So I think that's one area to sort of solve that problem is everyone was using different metrics for views, and unique users and peak users. So at least let's standardize that across AMA. And then the second point is, now that you can compare it to TV, it's okay, you can see what kind of ROI you're getting versus your TV spend. So I think in terms of the problem, you nailed it, which is that, everyone was reporting different metrics, and which is that, okay, League of Legends beats the Super Bowl. You hear that, that headline still, or Fortnite. And that's because they're confusing views with what Nielsen reports on TV, which is AMA. So now, we're starting to see that. And Nielsen just announced a couple of days ago that they're going to be working with Riot for coming up with a live plus 24 number.
Okay.
Excuse me. So that'll be
Like on
your
VOD
live
reviews
viewership.
and those kind of
Exactly.
thing. Yep.
Exactly. So that'll take into VOD as well. So that should help YouTube out a lot in terms of that measurement access. So you're going to start seeing, I think, Live plus 24, because that's the ultimately the pure one-to-one, apples-to-apples comparison you can have with TV.
Yeah, and I think it was in the instance of that World Cup example where, they were saying, here's the top out number, but when they did the AMA analysis of it, effectively it said, and again, I haven't got the data in front of me, it was effectively the same as like a San Francisco Giants baseball game on TV. Like that was the comparative AMA, the audience that they had, which again started to give advertisers some better understanding of what it is. It's not they're not the Super Bowl, which is still the pinnacle of all things viewing, but it gives them an idea of, well, if we're going to run our advertising, we're going to sponsor this broadcast, we know what we're going to get.
Yeah, for sure. And then I think another point you mentioned is, how are you going to compare it to, in the traditional sports side is that measurement has been there. You're talking about, decades of experience between different measurement companies to even mention, like, for example, jersey patches. What's that worth on like soccer and football teams? So that's been around for a while. So I think you're going to start seeing a lot more of traditional sports measurement come into the esports space, and that's going to validate it further.
And do you think that's a challenge for, I guess, the esports and gaming industry as they're moving into what is more of a traditional, media sponsorship space, because it's not, all inside the gaming bubble to a certain degree?
Yeah, I mean, because it's really interesting because esports isn't really siloed as it is in traditional sports. We're not talking about, one sport like baseball or Australian rules football or soccer or something like that. You're talking about, multiple titles across multiple genres like FPS, battle royale, sports simulation, racing, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really tough to sort of shoehorn in a complete traditional sports overview into esports. However, one thing that you are seeing, though, is when you're talking about the leagues, like the city-based leagues, they're desperately trying to do that, which is shoehorn in that, city-based, local-based audience, which is going to provide your revenue going forward. But I think esports and traditional sports, as much as people like to compare both of them, esports is just vastly different. I mean, even further to your point is that it lives primarily on the digital realm. Yeah. So while we see a lot of deals, Pro Saban just signed a deal to get ESL's German language content, and you're still seeing a lot of 24-hour satellite TV content like Jinx TV or Ven TV, which is soon to be launching here in the U.S. You're seeing a lot of different content come into play that's different than what you're truly seeing on the TV side. So that's another way that esports is different than traditional sports as well.
I think you also make a good point of, there is a common grouping together of everything. People say, yes, we want to invest in esports, and because they hear of the broader piece, but they don't understand the nuances of different titles with different publishers, with different schedules, with different tournament formats. Like that's the other, I guess, learning curve for traditional brands going to get wanting to get into the space, because different titles will have different demographic and different fan bases. That's another a challenge, because there's not a peak body, despite we keep seeing these esports federations trying to pop up. What's your take on I guess some of those federations that are trying to provide some governance across everything esports? Is it a futile exercise?
I think when I look at or see the news around federations, it does make me laugh a little bit, just because they haven't really accomplished anything to date. You're seeing a lot of federations pop up. They've been around for a while. Counter-Strike, I think, had 2 different federations. You saw the European Union launch their federation. Denmark just launched one a couple of days ago. So, I still look to execution as to what they're providing the space to see what value they're providing. But what I would say is, because, again, esports and traditional sports are so different, where the might and the power of esports resides with the publisher and their IP and what they control over it. I really think that if you're going to change anything, it's going to have to come from the publisher side. Because if you're a federation, what are you going to necessarily do that's gonna that's gonna provide value or be accretive to what the publishers have in terms of their control already. So, I think potentially, players unions, is that something that's going to come up? I think that's potentially going to be an option as well, because you don't have that in the space. But I think federations to date haven't really accomplished much in terms of what they're set out to do.
It is a challenging one, because in sport, that's where all the power ends up at that very top, with the the FIFAs and that of the world that effectively manage the whole game. But in the gaming world, those titles are held by the publishers themselves, and so they're going to look out for their titles and their objectives. What do you think? We've seen a few different models from a league's point of view. You talked about Overwatch, Call of Duty, sort of going into that franchising model. How do you think leagues are evolving and finding their space to both drive the sport forward, but then also to support those teams? Like you said before, there's a little bit of hope that those media rights come in and start funding the teams like a sports model. But is there other ways and other things that the publishers and the runners of the leagues can help grow the ecosystem?
Yeah, no, I think the biggest impact that's come into the space over the last 3+ years has been the advent of franchising.
Yep.
Starting with Overwatch, then going over to Riot, and then now Call of Duty. I think you see that as a means to show that all this investment's coming into the space. What am I getting out of it if I'm buying this quote unquote team or slot? If there's no guarantee if I'm going to be relegated, what's going to happen next year, et cetera, et cetera. So I think franchising has brought in a little bit of equilibrium and a little bit of stability to the space. Now, is that the end all be all? I don't necessarily think so. Now you're talking about, look at something like that's new, that's Flashpoint, which is a new Counter-Strike league that's going to be owned by teams.
Yep.
I think that's going to be interesting to see how they perform in the near term as well. So, is there a one solution for that fits all? I'm not necessarily sure, but franchising has become of real big importance over the last few years. But you still have a lot of tournament organizers that are just putting on their own events, without that support from the publishers. So like what Valve has done with Counter-Strike, almost hands off. What Nintendo has done with Smash Brothers, pretty much hands off. So, I think it's not necessarily franchising fits every model, but it's something that's new, and it's here to provide some stability to the space. Now, when you talk about the franchise fees, now that's a whole separate conversation.
Yes, it is. But I mean, it is providing, an ecosystem for this demand to get into the space. And so, especially in the US market, we're seeing a lot of either sports owners or high wealth individuals that haven't been able to get into the pro sports scene. There's only a finite amount of NFL franchises and NBA franchises you can't get in. And so I think there has been, by getting down to the franchise model in the US market, there's people wanting to get into the space, and when they're comparing it to pro sports franchises, which keep growing in value, that sort of helped provide more runway for the appetite that is in the US market.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing too is that it's really hard to think like a billionaire if you're not one yourself. Yep. So a lot of these billionaires and sports team owners that have come into the space, and they're throwing their 10, 20, 30 $1 million franchise fees, at Activision and Blizzard. That's not a lot of money when you're sitting on a couple $1 billion. Yep. So in terms of a long-term bet, that's something that they're willing to make, and they also understand the traditional sports side. They understand all the creative value that could bring in between having traditional sports and having esports. You have a younger demographic on the esports side that'll help draw into the aging demographic you have with traditional sports side. You're seeing teams build their training facilities or their headquarters right next to traditional sports arenas, like we're seeing in Foxborough and the Patriots, and that just opened up, and that's going to be the home for the Boston Uprising. So I think you see that value there, but it's really hard to think like a billionaire if you aren't one. And if this is a shot in the dark and a long-term bet, so maybe it, but it's like they have the capital to throw around.
And so what things we sort of discussed a little bit before, used looking at examples, some of the most successful esports teams, their focus is actually not on the esports. So looking at FaZe Clan as, really killing it from a content point of view, or 100 Thieves from a merch point of view. What should esports be focused on?
Yeah, I mean, that's, as I mentioned, the not so dirty secret is that esports teams aren't really making money from the esports side of the business, because, that would be essentially prize pools and anything directly related to the esports part of the organization as well. So, they're making their money on content, on merchandise, and sponsorship deals. I mean, I know for a fact that FaZe did, a significant amount of money in terms of sponsorship deals last year. And 100 Thieves is killing it. TSM, Cloud9, Team Liquid, I mean, they're all doing very well in terms of the sponsorship space, but they're still not making profit because their expenses are so high in terms of their esports teams. I mean, if you have a League of Legends team, you're talking a significant payroll salary that you need to keep just to be in the, in the top split. As you know from Gravitas as well, it's very expensive.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's one of the things that I guess coming into the scene and trying to understand the space and the costs involved, that I guess the hype got ahead of the and sort of drove up the costs without the revenue starting to match it. Do you think there is a little bit of a correction, and we've sort of seen that a little bit in this market, where costs are more tied to revenue, and we start seeing all of those things, a little bit of a correction to a certain degree, but sort of focus on, well, there's two ways to not lose money. That is not spend as much money and raise more money. And at the moment in esports, there's a little bit of, we keep spending and there's a little bit of hope that this money comes in. Do you think there's going to be a bit of a correction in that space?
I think so. You're starting to see it already. I mean, the valuations are just ridiculously high, and a lot of that one of my predictions for 2020 is that you're going to see a tier 2 org, several of them probably close this year, just because they don't have the resources to keep it up with their franchise fees, with their payroll, with what they need to do on the content side, what they do on the merch side. I think you're going to see some fallout this year. And, not necessarily a nuclear winter, but, a lot of teams are out there still trying to raise more money, and they just raised 9 months ago to a year ago. So that's a little bit frightening right there. But, a lot of them are just trying to make it through maybe the next, call it 2 years, if they can stay afloat, and then, hit profitability after that. I mean, I've seen some numbers from teams that are raising valuations at a ridiculous amount that I just don't know if they're going to get it. I mean, me personally, I wouldn't. If I had money, I wouldn't invest in teams. I'd probably invest in the infrastructure. Yep. But that's it's a TBD on what happens with teams going forward.
But it is also a case of, and again, back to that conversation around audiences and sponsors getting in. It does seem to be at that tipping point, and there's better data coming through to justify it. And we're seeing good case studies of sponsors getting in and getting results, not just, hey, we're putting our logo in this space, that will start starting to turn the corner around how do we do an appropriate partnership with a league and activate on their broadcast and activate with the team and activate an event. I think a lot of those are still, a lot of brands are starting to tick those boxes, and then there will be people that follow in. So we've got a few leaders in the space that are starting to do it, that are non-endemic, so not the technology brands that are starting to come in, realizing it's an attractive audience. And I think as more brands start coming in, realizing it's a valid option, and being able to book advertising on an esports broadcast and being able to activate and get good metrics and reporting, I don't think it's that far away, but I do think we need to be that's what, as an industry, we need to focus on, keep delivering those wins, because then, more sponsors will come.
Yeah, no, I think that's another great point. And, the canary in the coal mine for advertising and brands is renewals. Yep. And if you see what Riot has done in terms of their partnerships across, LCS, LPL, LEC, Oceania, they're having a huge, Sorry.
That's all right.
They're having a huge amount of success in terms of getting their brands to come back and sponsor them again. I mean, I think Pringles came back. DHL just signed with ESL for 2 more years. So you're seeing, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, all the auto brands that are coming in, alcohol brands like Bud Light, a significant amount in the space. So, you're starting to see a lot of those non-endemic brands come over into the space. And as I mentioned earlier, esports isn't so much, hey, what is it nowadays, the conversation?
Yep.
It's, okay, how can we really activate? What can we do? How can we take advantage of this opportunity? So you're starting to see those conversations switch already.
But you definitely need people who can talk that talk and sell that product to those brands to understand, hey, this is what we need to do to sustain our league, and then work on what that model looks like. As it is in traditional sports, the league is generating this amount of money. Then some of that money goes down to the teams to sustain those teams, to sustain those wages, to cover those operating costs, to give them the breathing room. Because, like you said before, an NBA team gets a fee at the start of the season because that comes from the media rights and the sponsorship that's driven from the revenue sharing deal that the NBA has. I think as those models start developing and the pipeline starts at the league, then the teams will have that bandwidth and budget to support their players and build out that infrastructure piece.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very, very fair point, is that teams are able to speak the media buying language, are able to translate what their capabilities are across content, merch, even their esports tournaments and their jerseys. I think are going to really excel going forward. And you're starting to see some of those teams sort of surge up ahead. Like we talked about FaZe, talked about 100 Thieves, but even you're talking about a new brand like Chicago Huntsman, they've got a great brand in what used to be Optic Gaming before. Yep. So brands are able to take advantage of their entire user base, the ones that are going to excel going forward.
So you sort of mentioned it before, but if you did hit the lottery and somehow a couple of $1 million landed in your bank account, where would you be placing that bet in the esports gaming space? Yeah,
so I would say anything to do with analytics.
Yep.
I think it's really, really important. Data is so key. And the fact that we're talking about, a digital platform that is just spewing out data on a continuous basis, I think that's going to be really interesting. Analytics on, say, improving your Counter-Strike accuracy or what you're doing wrong in League of Legends. I think that's sort of like AI teaching learning could be some interesting aspects that could help out with recruiting and talent management as well.
Yep.
So I think analytics across the board is really interesting. But anything, as I mentioned, the infrastructure I talked about earlier, anything to do in that space is kind of an open gold mine as well. There's a company in LA called Play Versus that's raised, I think, something like $96 million, I want to say, to get into the collegiate and high school space. So I think they're doing some interesting things as well. But anywhere that you could sell the picks and axes to help kind of get the industry going, I think that's an area that you want to play in.
Yeah, I mean the analytics space is a strange one for a digital asset like coming in. I was surprised how little data there was. Like for all the digital that's there, especially around the viewership, and again, it's trying to compare, what Twitch is and YouTube. I think the Activision deal with YouTube Gaming, I think that's going to be really great because we know YouTube has so much data on viewership, and analysis of that. I think that will actually help the industry overall. So I think that'll help from an audience point of view, but I also think that, I guess, that Moneyball approach, what you're talking about there, we're seeing a growth in analytics across NBA, NFL, football, all of those kind of things, helping the next generation become better players, whether it's Counter-Strike, League of Legends, Fortnite. There will be a lot of services in that space that will identify new talent and sort of start building out that infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to your point, the Moneyball for esports as a thing really hasn't existed yet.
Yeah.
A lot of people are trying to solve that problem, but someone's going to do it, because you're talking about pure data versus taking something like a physical sport, translating it into digital data, and then analyzing it. The fact that you have direct in-game data, I think it's going to be absolutely massive. So, look into one of those areas going forward.
Yeah, definitely. Before we get into, we'll just get into the closing five. I normally ask the first sports event you attended, but do you remember the first esports event you ever attended?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one was when I was working at Major League Gaming, and we held an X Games event with ESPN in
Okay.
Austin, Texas. That was my first exposure to that, and it was a relatively small setup. We were out in the raceway out in Austin where the X Games was held, but at least it got me a chance to see, firsthand, up close, what it's like to see the players in action, see the fans in action, see how brands can activate on site. But I would say what really blew my mind away was seeing League of Legends at Madison Square Garden.
Yep.
And that was just absolutely mind blowing. And did you see something where, it's such a prestigious arena like Madison Square Garden to hold an event for League of Legends, and to see, thousands and thousands of fans just cheering. It was absurd. So I would say Major League Gaming, Austin is my first one, but definitely League of Legends and MSG was definitely probably what convinced me about this market.
Yeah. And I think that's where we've seen music bounce back in a big way around events, right? All the major musicians in the world make all their money now on touring. I do think there's a real big opportunity. Touch wood, coronavirus does not continue to spread and cause more cancellations of events or no fan events, as we saw at IEM recently. But like when you see, and that's when all the conversations we're having with brands is they're really excited about an event. We've got Melbourne Esports Open here in August. It's in the same venue that the Australian Open is at, and in the same precinct. So there's so much real estate there for brands to connect with fans, and to move away from the digital world. So that opportunity, if you haven't been to an event, I highly suggest go to an event, because that definitely takes away that is esport a sport and all of those kind of things, because it's like fans in the stands cheering, watching something. It's exactly the same as sport, and that's where I think there's massive upside. That comes, there's big costs to running those events and those kind of things, but there is a definite appetite for those events, and the fans that go them are just as crazy as the ones that are at Lambeau Field for the Packers, or Madison Square Garden for the Knicks, although they don't cheer that much these days. Right. They're just as passionate. Do you have a favorite food memory? Is there an esports food that's the go-to food at an esports event, or is it stock standard food that you might have at an event?
They're actually doing some interesting things. So there's Esports Stadium Arlington, as well as the Blizzard Arena, which held the first two seasons of Overwatch League. They do some really fun sort of theme-based food, related around to the game and things like that. So I think that's really interesting. What I saw also was that Downtown Grand, which is a Vegas-based casino and hotel, they really want to plant their flag in the esports space. And so when they were designing their menu, they came up with menus that are food items that didn't require a lot of utensils. Okay. So it'd be easier for you, and didn't make your fingers as sticky, if you're eating with your hands, for example, so you couldn't hold a controller. So I think, some of that stuff is like really, really, really fun.
And that's where we end up with all the different take a product and put the word gaming or esports against it and say, here they are. You end up with those kind of things. It's his gaming food. We recently saw, what was it, the gaming bed? I think it is.
In Japan. Yeah, it's absolutely absurd.
It is amazing how many people are trying to, I guess, ride the wave and get involved. What's the first app you open in the morning?
First app I open is email.
Email.
I have to say I've been an email junkie first thing in the morning. But I would say the app that I tend to probably use the most in terms of just, branding, news, comments, keeping my finger in my pulse in the space is Twitter. Yep. I definitely Twitter is my social media network of choice and my platform of choice. And while it can be a little disruptive and you tend to go down the rabbit hole sometimes, I tend to find that it's the best way for me to keep in track of a lot of the information that's out there.
Yes. So you can follow Manny Anekal, Anekal, Anekal. But the links will be in the show notes, and they'll be on every tweet that I post. Well, you probably follow a lot of people on Twitter. Is there someone that you suggest that the listeners should follow themselves? Maybe if they want to get a few some other insights, are there people that you follow either on Twitter or potentially read, or columnists that you follow that people should be checking out?
Sure. One person I really like is there's an analyst out of the UK named Daniel Ahmad. He goes by the Twitter handle Zugex, which is ZHUGEX, and he does a lot of reporting on Asia.
Okay.
I think Asia is absolutely fascinating. Asia, China, the growth areas there. What's going on with mobile esports? I mean, mobile esports is unknown here in the West, but in Asia, it's absolutely dominant. So check out Zugex. He's actually really, really good.
Well, yeah, thank you. Yeah, we didn't even, and that's part of the beauty of esports. We didn't even touch on mobile, and
Right.
it's another beast altogether that is still growing, and we sort of don't know where it's going to end up. You might have mentioned earlier, and you sort of spoiled it, but that's okay. What social media platform is your MVP?
Yeah, so Twitter for sure. Yeah, it's my favorite one.
And I think I guess coming into the space over the officially the last couple of years, with Gravitas, I found at least the ecosystem and the fervor around esports and following esports, it's still relatively. Yes, there is a bit of a cesspool of Twitter sometimes, a rabbit hole, but it is rather connected in Twitter. That it sort of feels like the sports industry, I guess, 8 years ago. So it is still relatively easy. There's still conversations happening in the Twitter space, around the esports industry, around the leagues. The fans very much are following along. Like that seems to be the most connected platform from a fan's point of view, and the connectivity between fans and players is definitely happening on Twitter. Is that pretty much, you think, that the case that you're seeing?
Yeah, and I wrote a while ago. This is now 2 years plus on how Twitter should enter esports, and 8 days later they actually announced their first media deal. Yep. And you look at what Twitter represents is that your follower account is pretty much a gamer score. Yeah, that's the way I look at it. Yeah, and it's really, really prevalent in terms of how people spread their content around. One stat that not too many people know is that the number one referrer to Twitch is Twitter.
Okay.
So, it's a really, really easy way for content creators and influencers to basically get their message around that, hey, I'm live, or I just posted my VOD. They do a lot of that on there. So, Twitter is definitely, I would say, just not for me, but if you work in esports and gaming, it's probably the number one social media platform there is. I mean, two, I really like LinkedIn personally. Yep. I think there's a lot of engagement on there. If you use the platform right, you get a lot of great dividends from there. But definitely Twitter for me, if I had to pick one, would be that.
But yeah, definitely those traffic numbers are, completely opposite to the sports industry. Like Facebook is still the main driver. It's still driving 30% of traffic for most sports teams. But yeah, Twitter and Twitter is hardly driving any traffic. So it is something to say, if you are coming into the space, that the platforms shift a little bit.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then you're starting to see Facebook make a play. I mean, they've now signed some exclusive deals, and I don't count Facebook out. They had the largest growth of streaming platforms in 2019. I want to say Facebook grew 83%.
Yep.
Year over year. So you're still starting to see some significant growth on that side.
Yeah, we are sort of going through the streaming wars. I mean, Twitch is obviously the major player and the dominant player, but YouTube's throwing its punches, which is not a small player at all, but it's growing in the gaming space. And then you've got Mixer with Microsoft coming in with Mixer. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. It will create some competition. It will create some tension in that media rights space, and we'll actually start seeing who can actually move audiences. I think that's one of the exciting spaces in there, and whether it's driven by esports or whether it's driven by content and streaming
or the platform itself.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's going to be interesting to see, I guess, what they focus on and what drives results for them and how they go about monetizing it, because that's what's going to fund those deals. If they find that an audience helps them sell more ad slots themselves and they make more revenue, that's what's going to drive it as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's all exciting stuff coming down the pike.
Well, Manny, thank you very much for catching up. Appreciate you taking the time. Where's the best place on the internet for people to reach out to you?
Sure. As I mentioned, Twitter is my go-to. So follow me on Twitter at Manny Anekal, MANNYANEKAL. And I'm always happy to reach out to anyone who DMs me, chat about the space as well.
All right. And you're also available on LinkedIn. We'll have your links to your LinkedIn on the show notes. And as I say most times, if you listen to the podcast and you like the episode, please reach out and say thank you to Manny. And I'll say thank you now. So thanks for coming on the podcast.
Awesome, Sean. Really appreciate it.
We love your support on our Patreon campaign. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon.
Thanks again to Manny. You can connect with him on LinkedIn. The links will be in the show notes. sportsgeekhq.com/271. If you go to SportsGeek, it will be at the very top of the page. Or you can reach out to him on Twitter, Manny, MANNYANEKAL on Twitter. And please reach out and tell him that you listened. I was super pumped to get to see a tweet recently from a former guest, Johannes Walhert, who was on episode 185, talking about the Swedish Basketball Federation. He's recently tweeted, "My podcast listening is up again, and this is still one of the most relevant, entertaining podcasts about sports biz. Just today, I talked to a person for the first time who said, 'Yeah, I know you from the Sports Geek podcast.' I like the second half. I really do appreciate that Johannes is still listening, but I love it when listeners reach out to guests and tell them that they listened to them and heard them on the podcast. So you're a listener. You're listening right now. Please reach out to Manny. Please reach out to the guests that you have stole with pride. If you're stealing some of their great work and great ideas, please let them know. It really gives me a real pep in my step. So thanks Johannes for tweeting it out, and thank you to whoever reached out and said that they know Johannes from the podcast. I really do appreciate it. You know who you are. Please send me a tweet, send me a DM. I really do appreciate it. The conversation with Manny was really interesting. Really good to talk to someone who has a really broad view of the esports space. What I can do now is sort of give a little bit of an update of where we are from our esports journeys, if you will. We are currently, as I'm recording this, I'm hopefully by the time this goes to air, this has stopped. We're currently in a really big losing streak with Gravitas. Unfortunately, we haven't found the right combination and team dynamic to get a win, but we are working on it. It is a work in progress. But we do have to celebrate the milestones. And recently, last week, we celebrated our 50th game in the OPL. So that, for mine, is a milestone in itself. So looking forward to the next 50, but also looking forward to the next 500. Like the conversation went with Manny, we're very much taking a long-term view on the space, and we really do look at what the esports landscape will look like both here in Australia, but also globally in 5 years' time. And that's been most of the conversations I've been having in the esports market here and in the sports market here in Australia, and I think it does apply globally. Some of the key parts when we're talking to brands on how they can enter into the esports space, they normally center around a few different things. One of the things that we did discuss there with Manny is events. What do events look like in the esports space? We're very lucky here in Melbourne to have the Melbourne Esports Open. It's entering its third year. It's going to be combined with IEM, so some really big Counter-Strike teams are going to come along. So it's going to just keep getting bigger and bigger and becoming the go-to destination in the same way that later this week or next week, the Grand Prix will be coming to town, touch wood, coronavirus notwithstanding. It's going to be another major event in that way. And I think one of the things I am telling brands, I think it's one of the most underactivated sports events in Australia. And that's not a slight on TEG and ASL who are running it. It's just that it's got so much space because it's effectively filling the same space as the Australian Open in the tennis. And so when you're comparing using the same space, it does look a little bit sparse because you've got all this space to activate. And Tennis Australia do a great job of activating every single inch of that Melbourne Olympic Park precinct. So to me, that is a massive opportunity, and that is also where there is a lot of interest for brands starting to understand the esports and gamer market, and I think that will be a really good way to get more brands involved. There's obviously opportunities at league level. The OPL, the Oceanic Pro League, the Gravitas is in, is the premium product and the premium esport in Australia from a viewership and broadcast point of view. There's still a lot of work to do in that space in helping brands get integrated into that league, and then obviously got a bias that there's opportunities from a team point of view, but it's about getting that model right. Where does the sponsorship money go from a league level? How does that flow down to teams? How do teams play? And part of that, what we've been doing is building a lot of relationships with agencies and brands to help them understand how to connect these sports, and then what are the opportunities there. And I think the other one that will also move things along and move the needle a little bit is the opening of Fortress Melbourne, a rather large esports and gaming bar that's opening up here in Melbourne, at Emporium Melbourne, in the shopping centre there. And so that's going to open later this week on Friday the 13th. So looking forward to seeing how both the gaming and esports community embrace that, but also how it starts becoming a bit more mainstream to go play some games, watch some games, those kind of things. I'm looking forward to hosting a future Sports Business Melbourne event there. So if you want to have a chat about esports, how potentially your team can leverage and enter the gaming and esports space, doesn't necessarily mean you have to open a team. There's plenty of other ways you can start connecting with that audience that is very engaged with the world of gaming. So that's pretty much it. That's a bit of an update on where things are at from an esports point of view and what we're doing. As I sort of said on a Q&A episode, more of my time this year is on Sports Geek initiatives. But yeah, still very bullish on all things esports and what we plan to do with Gravitas as we get more brands and sponsors on board. But if you want to have a chat, if you want to discuss how we can help you in that space, whether it is helping you on the esports side and gaming and entering that market, or the stock standard stuff, the stuff we love doing, which is working on digital, understanding your audience, how do we better commercialize it, how do we get our sponsors involved? That's the stuff that I've been really working a lot on with a few different clients so far this year. I want to keep working on that. You can book in. Let's have a chat. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/phone call. And yeah, let's have a chat about how I can help you. And before I go, please, I'm going to put out another call out. Send in those questions. I've got to do another batch of Q&A episodes, and I need more questions. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/questions. Send them in. Really do appreciate it. And if you are enjoying, if you've got this far, if you got to the end of the podcast, you haven't been fast forwarded to the very end, please sign up for Patreon. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon. I'd really appreciate your support. I appreciate everyone who has supported so far, both from a personal level and from a company level. It really does mean a lot to me. Until next episode, my name is Sean Callanan, and you've been listening to Sports Geek.
Join Sports Geek Nation access to exclusive Slack and Facebook groups with regular Q&A sessions with Sean Callanan. Go to sportsgeeknation.com to join. Got a question for Sean? Send it in for our Sports Geek Q&A series. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/questions. Go to sportsgeekhq.com for more sports digital marketing resources.
Just a quick little bonus tidbit. I recorded the intros and outros for this episode before Gravitas played this weekend, and I'm pleased to announce the Gravitas boys had a massive upset, defeating the number 2 team in Legacy. I'm super pumped. I hope you can tell by my voice, and I just wanted to share the sounds of the game. The last 30 seconds of the win. Really pleased to see all the hard work the boys are putting in behind the scenes to get the win. So please indulge me. Here are the Gravitas boys taking down the Nexus.
Premier gets the first kill. They're looking to try and find another. Raze is gone. That could be it for Gravitas. 40 minutes in, from start to finish, they have commanded this game.
They don't have teleports. They need to be able to heal up a little bit here, Skimmy. It's still on a knife's edge, but Tally is oomed.
The Nexus turret is going to fall on down. It's an open Nexus. It is what they're looking for. They find another kill. They find the Nexus. They find the upset. Gravitas will do it, and they will dethrone your second place team.